Good afternoon everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, our first for 2013. My name is Olivia Clayton and I will be the facilitator today for this quite unique opportunity to hear not from a practice expert or an academic, but from a mother who, after experiencing child removal herself, has dedicated her career to helping other families headed by a parent with learning difficulties. And it is perhaps particularly relevant to hear from the parent in our first webinar for this year, as 2013 marks the 20th anniversary of the Disability Discrimination Act. Although, as Graham Innes said on The World Today last week, the law has been more effective for people with physical and sensory disability than it has for psychosocial and intellectual disability. This webinar is brought to you by the national strategy Healthy Start, which aims to increase the capacity of the service system throughout Australia to better support families headed by a parent with learning difficulties. Healthy Start is an initiative of the Faculty of Health Sciences at the University of Sydney and the Parenting Research Centre based in Melbourne, and we're funded by the Australian Government to essentially bridge the gap between what we know works for families headed by a parent with learning difficulties and what happens in reality for these families. We do this by disseminating information about best practice, running forums to exchange knowledge about tools or resources and about best practice, and supporting key individuals such as Susan to become leaders in this field. And if you would like more information about Healthy Start or discuss how we might work together, please contact me, and my details are on our website. So a bit of an intro, what do we mean by people or parents with learning difficulties? Well, we mean people who may have difficulty attending or concentrating on large chunks of verbal information, learning and remembering things when a lot of information is given at once, people who may need support to come up with several different options for solutions to problems, or support to communicate effectively, support in discriminating and social skills. However, we know from several decades of research now that these characteristics, often measured by IQ assessments, are a poor predictor of parenting capacity. There is now a good amount of published research about what might predict neglect or abuse, and this example here is a good one. The researchers looked for characteristics amongst parents with intellectual disability who were involved with child protection and compared them to parents with intellectual disability who were not involved with child protection. No difference in IQ status was found, rather a difference between other characteristics. So characteristics that can be helped or changed with the right support. The living conditions of parents with learning difficulties are often described as chaotic. Poverty and unemployment often results in frequently having to move location, live in substandard housing, and experience high stress, depression and poor general health. In 2003, a study by the University of Sydney, mothers were found to have double the rate of gestational diabetes when they had learning difficulties compared to the general population. They were nearly 3 times as likely to experience preeclampsia and had 2 times higher rate of premature delivery. Their children were also 3 times more likely to have low birth weight and were more frequently admitted to neonatal intensive care or special care nursery. And in addition, 50% of the mothers with learning difficulty had clinically significant levels of depression, anxiety and stress. It's known that parents with learning difficulty may also undergo additional stress and profound feelings of anger and helplessness due to the constant threat of child removal by authorities. For many parents who have learning difficulties or a diagnosed intellectual disability, a history of childhood maltreatment resulting in few positive parenting skills being passed from one generation to the next is common. Also, a present and strong social support network, which is known to be effective in decreasing stress and depression amongst all new parents, is less likely to be a reality for these parents. Finally, parenting information and services accessible to individuals who have difficulties reading, writing or participating in groups are rare. Now, from both Australian and international research, we know that with the right support matched to the learning needs of a parent, such as working in the home and at the pace of the parent, parents with learning difficulties can parent well. We also know that IQ status is a poor predictor of parenting capacity, and that it is other factors related to poverty and parents' own experiences of neglect or abuse which are better predictors. Despite knowing this, families headed by a parent with learning difficulty are represented within the child protection system up to 50% more than would be expected given their prevalence in the population. That's more than parents with physical disabilities and more than parents with mental health concerns. These families are more likely also to be brought to court on insufficient evidence of neglect or abuse, what we might call a presumed incompetence. And once a child is removed, parents with learning difficulties are less likely to have their parenting rights restored and are more likely to have their child placed in non-kinship, out-of-home care. More recently, Australian researchers highlighted the disturbing psychological impact of child removal for these parents, that the outcome is often ongoing feelings of loss, powerlessness, sadness and anger, made worse by the fact that many parents experience multiple removals without any grief counselling or support groups available. Perhaps not surprising is the experience of helplessness and stress faced by the professional supporting these families. The common cry out amongst professionals who contact Healthy Start is, "I have been looking for appropriate services for this family and there is nothing." So what can we do better? I am delighted to welcome our guest speaker today, Susan Arthur. Susan is a mother and a self-advocate for parents with an intellectual disability at Reinforce, an advocacy agency run for and by people with an intellectual disability. Susan has agreed at the end of her presentation to take some questions from the audience. To do this, click on your control panel for GoToWebinar. You'll see a box there where you can post questions. But I encourage you to submit a question here at any time. Her presentation will go for about 30 minutes, and in the last 15 minutes I'll pick out some of the questions you've submitted for her to respond to. At the commencement of question time, you'll see a link also to a webinar evaluation survey in your chat window. Please click on this link to complete a short feedback form to let us know what you thought. And if you miss this link, you can complete the survey via a link that will be sent to you via email tomorrow morning, along with a recording of the webinar and some other relevant resources. Now, if you require any technical support for this webinar, please contact Laura Nicholson. Her details are on your screen now, and she can also enter her details into your control panel in the chat section. Now we have most of you who have joined us, so let's have a look at who is in the audience. We had 170 registrations for today, which is an astounding and pleasing amount for this critical topic. We have, from the survey responses, a nice chunk of our audience say they are involved with work in child protection. The largest proportion there from disability-specific services, followed by those who work in family services, people from the education sectors, and then children's services next, followed by those who work in research, mental health and primary care, which I think includes nursing and midwifery, and then also a handful of advocates who work in this area. I'd like to ask for a bit of participation from you right now by running a poll which should be appearing on your screen now. What brings you here today? If you could select the best option. Fantastic. So almost 90% of you have voted now. So I will close the poll. So 35% are keen to hear about the experiences from the parent. And 58% of you are hoping to learn from Susan about more practical ways to support parents with child protection, and there's also a proportion of you, exactly 7% of the audience, who have been drawn to this webinar without knowing much about the area at all. So if you fall in this category, I would encourage you to jump onto our website after the presentation and have a browse through the summaries of research there, practice points and topics about things such as how to tailor work for parents with learning difficulties. Also keep an eye on what's happening on Healthy Start by joining our e-news. You can subscribe here via the homepage. We also are very keen to discuss, meet or connect with people who are interested in this field, and indeed connect others. One way we do this is via an online practice network, which I'm going to now, which requires a sign-up. At the end of today, a link to the recording of this webinar will be on the network under this discussion topic. So I encourage you to forward on the link to your colleagues or networks who might like to watch it at another time. We'll also have an online discussion here related to today's webinar, commencing at its conclusion. Now I think that's just about enough of me, and I'm going to hand over the presentation to Susan.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for inviting me, Olivia. My name is Susan Arthur. I'm from an organisation called Reinforce. Reinforce is run by and for people with an intellectual disability. Reinforce in the past have done lots of things. They've been involved in trying to close the institutions, was one thing I could think of. They have also come up with their own slogans such as "Our voices should be heard and not denied." Plain English, less jargon. Just recently, Reinforce let me start a subgroup called the Powerful Parents Self-Advocacy Group, PPSAG, which is for parents with an intellectual disability who have their children. The group is also for parents who have lost their children to protective services. We are not very big yet, but the Powerful Parents Self-Advocacy Group wants parents with an intellectual disability to have the same rights as any other parent in the community, receive the support, education and resources they need to keep our children at home with us, have the same right to reunification with our children as any other parent, and to be provided with support and educations and resources to make this happen. Know that we are not alone, be treated with respect, have the support we need to have good levels of access to our children. One of the mums from my group even come up with a poem for the group. The poem is called "Before You Judge." Before you judge our lives, our past or our character, walk in our shoes, walk the paths we have travelled, live our sorrows, our doubts, our fear, our pain and our laughter. Remember, everyone has a story. When you have lived our lives, then you can judge us. As I've said before, I'm a mother and an advocate, and I'm a mother to a beautiful, now 4-year-old little girl. Our story. Well, I have, as I just said, a 4-year-old little girl who has just turned 4 in September of last year. We didn't have the right support, so she lived with Grandma most of her life. I guess what helped us was sort of realising this is, it helped us realising that we just wanted what was best for Chloe. I think what made things worse at that time was she was a baby when it was originally happening, so neither me or my partner could not always see what challenges would be before us, like as she would get older. And as in our case, there was no way around it, unfortunately. There was funding barriers, as there quite often is with parents who are on the high level functioning. And she's living with extended family. It is good that child protection says the child should stay in a family wherever possible. I agree with that, because you have some hope that the family is teaching this child of the parent's disabilities. But it's come to my attention recently that this is not happening. So I just therefore say, why do you have kinship care if these people who are better parents than us are not teaching the child about the disability? And that's why I would say sometimes it's not the best option. And the reasons for saying that is the family may not get along well with the parent or parents who have learning difficulties. The family may have not been able to come to terms with their sibling or whatever relation they are, being able to come to terms with that person in their lives having a disability. It is important to help the parents to stay involved, and I think it's important that the parents, get as much assistance as possible. So even if there's no way around and the child has to leave the home of the parents, I think the parent should be involved as much as possible for both them and the person caring for the child. Reunification. Everyone should have hope to get their child back one day. I think this is very important. And to explain what the problem is and how to fix it. So I think it's very important you sit the person down with a learning difficulty. They don't always understand you might be saying something and they're not understanding it, and then they get angry and then they yell at you or whatever, and you think, oh, this parent's not good because, they've just yelled at me and they're going to yell at their kid. The reason they're yelling is because they haven't always been taught anything better to do. That's one thing. And secondly, they're not understanding. So that's their only way. Sometimes they're not confident to say, look, I'm not understanding you. I'm not leaving this room until you put it in a way that I might understand. Also, I would encourage people, especially child protection, to give people a chance, especially people with learning disabilities. We're not a big savage Alsatian. We're not going to go and bite people. And most of us want what is best for our children at the end of the day. And most of us just want to give what we can to that child. Now, we can't fix or get rid of our disability, even though nearly 90% of us wish we could at some stage or another. There are concerns, legitimate or just out of a textbook. One size does not fit all, and you have to understand this. Just because you had a parent yesterday who you removed the child off, they might not have been feeding it, they might not have been changing its nappy, so on and so on, and you removed the child for that reason, which could be a very good reason to remove the child, but you can't then presume me as a parent's going to do the same thing, because we're not all the same thing. And I do encourage people to realise that, especially intellectual disability, which Reinforce specialise in, it can be to bottom of the line where people are in CRUs to be looked after, or it can be the top of the line where they're in their own house, in their own community, living their life as what you would see as an everyday citizen. Reinforce also believe in intellectual disability itself is a very hidden disability. You do not always see it until the person is trying to do something where their intellectual disability might be impacting on them. Reflection. I think it's better that we work together for change. I don't want to be seen as, oh no, we don't want to listen to this girl. She wants money, 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 and we can't provide her with it. Oh, yeah, okay, turn off. I think we should try and work together for change. And in a perfect world, what would we have? With unlimited funding, and in the perfect world, what would have enabled Chloe to live at home? Well, as I just said, unlimited funding would have made that possible. Sort of, okay, you just sit down and tick all these boxes, what you need help with, what you don't need help with. There's unlimited money, don't worry about money. There's unlimited time, don't worry about time. Just mark your boxes, what you need help with, what you don't need help with, and we'll provide you a worker that will best suit your needs. I think it's important to say that we're not living in that perfect world. I wish we were. The disability packages for parenting assistance does just not exist, and I've been informed that at the start of this year it's been now made a priority on the Disability Support Register, and I say yippee to that, but DSR is broke, so it's not helping us, it's not giving us a solution, and to me it's just giving child protection another reason to remove our children, because we're on a very long waiting list waiting for funding that might never come. Future plans are important, and no one should be told they are never getting their child back. It's okay to have a long-term strategy, even 10 years, but we must keep the parent well connected and reassess regularly. And I think this is important, and I know that child protection workers are going to be taking their hair off right now saying we don't have that resource, we don't have the time, and we don't have anything else. But with parents with an intellectual disability, we just feel that someone else who may not have a disability, who had clearly done something wrong to the child to get the child removed, have lost their children and got them back. So we're just asking for a little bit of the same. As I said, we want to be treated the same way as you would treat anyone else, like your next door neighbours. I'd like to thank you for listening and pass you back to Olivia.
Thank you so much, Susan, for sharing your thoughts about the system itself, and also a little bit about your personal experience. I actually had a question I wanted to get in first. It is that time, everyone. If you wanted to ask any questions of our presenter, to pop that in the control panel under questions, which we will be able to see. We're still going to finish this webinar at the advertised time. We've got about just over 15, we've got 20 minutes now to have a bit more of a discussion. That's absolutely fine. I think it would be good to have much more of a sort of discussion between the two of us and have the audience ask some questions. So if anyone would like to post through a question, please do that now. But my first question for you, and there's quite a few here, so I feel a bit guilty jumping in, but I will anyway. My first question for you is, are you still working with child protection yourself in order to look to have Chloe reunified with you at some point? Or have you got some arrangements there around visiting, and how did that come about?
No, unfortunately we decided that the best thing for Chloe was to stay with her grandmother where she was. And unfortunately we had to lose our guardianship, so we weren't at all keen about that, but it was the only way of protecting Chloe, so we were told. Of course, you know, as I was saying earlier, you know, and that's perfect world stuff that I would get Chloe back. I understand that it wouldn't be possible. Accesses, they are very nice. We see each other once a week for 2 hours. But I would just encourage everyone online today to imagine yourself with a high-functioning intellectual disability and a slightly mobility problem, and realising you can only see your child once a week for 2 hours and then have to give it back. It's something that you don't like. And recently she's asked me to ring her every night to say goodnight. And I love doing that, but some of the calls can be quite distressing to me as she says, I only want Mummy. I want you to be here. I know you can't look after me, but I want you to be here. And I mean, as her grandmother says, she would have the whole world there if she could. So it's not just me and Dad, but I felt quite guilty that I couldn't just be there right at that moment when she wanted me. So I'd just like to encourage those of you who are parents to think, well, what would I do if I was put in that scenario?
Thank you, Susan. We do have quite a number of questions to try and get through here. The first one's quite simple that I picked out for you, which is just one of our audience members wondering how old you are.
I'm 29 myself, turning 30 on Saturday.
On Saturday?
Yeah.
Oh, happy birthday. Now our next question, which I'll pull out, is whether you've come across, and I might speak to this a little bit as well, but whether you've come across any support service that you might recommend for parents to rely on for their communication with community services. Does Reinforce do some of that?
Unfortunately, we can't, but it depends on what community service you're talking about. If it's legal services, well, Reinforce are happy to get you in touch with Villamanta, which is, I know they're based in Geelong, but don't fret, they are statewide used, and we often refer people to Villamanta. There's another independent advocacy group near us, so if we struck it as, no, this is not self-advocacy, this is individual advocacy, we would often refer you on to there too.
Yeah, and of course you're talking about services in Victoria.
Yeah.
And
if it was out of state, like New South Wales or ACT or Perth or wherever, if Reinforce couldn't help you, we would try and get you maybe in touch with Olivia, who might be able to know resources, or we would try and find the answer for you, and if we couldn't, then we would come back to you and say, we're deeply sorry, we can't find. But sometimes if you can't find it, it's not there.
Although each state and territory does have an advocacy body for people with disability in some form or another, so there is at least someone to get in contact with.
It's also knowing on what type of form it is, like, you know, Adelaide might be very different to Victoria, so I think that's just important to realise.
Yeah, and there's a list actually of those key advocacy agencies on our Healthy Start website under the Parents section. And I've got another question here asking you, Susan, whether you had any involvement with a child and family health nurse or a maternal and child health nurse, it would be here, before or after Chloe was removed from your care to her grandmother.
Yes, we were very lucky in our story. We've always stayed as a family and taught Chloe that, you know, we were together on everything. So we were, even if we weren't her parents or whatever you call it, we were still invited to maternal child health appointments. And I remember every time I went there, how's the back? Is the back still straight? Not worrying about everything else they're testing for. I'm like, who bugger's that? What about the back? Because I had the very rare form of scoliosis, infant scoliosis. And for me, it wasn't picked out because the doctor, and I didn't walk until I was 3, unlike my little girl who was off about 18 months. And once she was off, you weren't stopping her, so she was early. But, you know, we always were involved with appointments, and, yeah, she doesn't see the maternal child health nurse anymore, being 4. And they even extended their service because of us and our very unique situation, and they knew I was quite worried about the infant form of scoliosis. I didn't know what age it could come on. Well, I knew it could come on at birth, but I didn't know if it didn't come on at birth, if it could still come on. So, and the maternal child health nurse was great. She always checked her back and said, no, it's fine.
And so this maternal child health nurse was working with you for a short time there before Chloe was removed?
Yes.
Yeah. And how old was she when she was removed is another question.
It's really hard to say because we never fully had her in our care at all. For about a year of her life, we tried and went to live with her grandma and us all together in one house, which wasn't going to work as a long-term solution, even though you dream of that, because that could be the best solution for everybody involved. But that wasn't applicable, and I'm sure everyone can realise why. It was only a 2-bedroom, or, you know, 2-bedroom/study house, so, you know, and it wasn't fully accessible for my physical disabilities either. So,
another question here relates to those early days. There's a couple of questions on this topic actually. Is do you have any advice for those working in the field of from your own experience looking back then? What sort of practical supports? What sort of supports would have been helpful for you at that time before Chloe?
Well, I think if you put a perfect world in again, sending us home maybe with some sort of Excel sheet of, right, this is what we think you should do roughly at this and this time. Not an exact, you know, guide, because you can't do that with children. Children do not come with instructions, even though I said that she should. And I asked Child Protection did they have the instruction manual for her, and they said no. But, you know, yeah, I think in a perfect world, sending us, instead, I mean, we were very lucky. Child Protection even sent us to QEC, O'Connell Centre, neuropsychs. But I started to wonder, why we're going to a neuropsych. Neuropsych's not going to, that will prove I've got a disability, yes, but it's not going to prove how I can or not look after my child. But that's what they were wanting her to do, say if I could do that.
Yeah. Another question relates to what you're just talking about now, actually, which is, did you have any difficulty navigating all the different types of agencies or particularly
Well, we were
agencies?
just told to go to these places. I mean, if I had the choice, I probably would have said, look, try and let us do it, and you watch us from a bay, so to speak, and let us just take Chloe home and like sort of trial and error. But, and I think that's another a place where child protection can maybe get better, and understanding too that the QEC, well, especially back when we went to it, now it might have changed because, as I said, Chloe is 4 now, and we went when she was only a few months old. They were a bit like, if you can't, like they have a sheet of paper saying what can the parent do and what can't the parent do. And they would show you, like, okay, this is how you change a nappy. Now you do it. And if you didn't do it, instant cross to your name. And it might have just been because that was not the way we learn. We don't learn by you telling us. Maybe I need to learn by watching you 100 times over, and why that might get frustrating for the normal person. And that's what I'm trying to say. Don't take it out of a textbook that people with intellectual disabilities particularly are the same. We're not, and we all have our own little way we learn the best.
Another question, Susan, firstly, this member of the audience says thank you very much for sharing your thoughts, and whether you did actually have any support or help to learn parenting skills when you were pregnant, and would that have been helpful?
Well, this isn't actually, I can laugh at it now, sort of sad story. I found out I was pregnant and told the service provider that I'm pregnant, I need to learn parenting. Bugger the rest of it, what I had on my goal sheet. Let's get rid of that, parenting. And they sent someone in and he wanted to do budgeting, food, shopping and all this other shit that excuse my language, that I had no idea what that had to do with parenting. I'm like, excuse me? But, you know, so for quite a while we were mucked around. And then it came to the crunch, well, Chloe's coming, ready or not. And basically me and Justin weren't ready because we weren't able to get that support in place. We weren't able to even try and prove we could learn because, as I said just before, we didn't get it in the way we needed, and we were buggered around for a few months, and there was quite a lot of stress over both me and my partner at the time while Chloe was in my womb, because we knew both of us had a disability. One of us, we had no idea where it came from. The other one, my partner, was expected to have trisomy 18, which is a very rare disability, and if Chloe was to have that, she would have been non-existent. So we had rough choices to make as parents, and if she had that, we would end the pregnancy, and we had the test to tell us if she had that, and she didn't. So we went on the pregnancy, but it was a very hard pregnancy because I blamed myself a lot if she did come out with disabilities. And I was always angry, I didn't know what was wrong with me. And how could I, if my child had it, which God's sake she doesn't, and we know that by genetic testing now, but if she had had my disabilities, how could have I possibly even got an early intervention for a disability that doesn't have a name? And isn't the mother meant to be able to do everything like this for her child? So, yeah.
Thank you, Susan. And back to thinking about support during pregnancy, a couple of people are very interested to hear whether they're looking back now, what sort of support would you have, or what sort of teaching, learning, parenting support would you have liked, or parenting education I should say, you would like while you were pregnant?
I think just possibilities of what the child may or may not do, and then sitting us down and saying, okay, now, what do you think you would do? And if we didn't get the answer right the first time, okay, go, sort of quiz us more until we get it right, and then, but instead of dropping it next week or next day or whenever we see you next, do you remember what to do if your baby has a high temperature? are you going to run it down to the hospital? The first thing, which that would be my reaction, get the kid down to the hospital. Don't worry about anything else, just...
And probably the reaction of many first mums.
Yeah. And being that I was a very sick baby myself, with an included high temperature, that wouldn't have helped my get her to a hospital now rather than wait approach would have been. But yeah, I think that would have been a lot better, but at that time that was not available. Now it may be available now, I'm not sure, because, you know, Chloe's not in our care, so we're not accessible or applicable to a lot of these parenting programs that are there now. Some places will let you learn parenting, but sometimes I say, well, what's the point? She's not with me. I only have her for 2 hours. And at the moment, that 2 hours is supervised, so I've got someone else to ask. But, you know, I think it's best if you try and let the parent work it out themselves, because I think if you go, and that's the problem, sometimes children won't give you enough time to sit down and think about it. And that was one of Child Protection's major concerns with me and my partner, that she would say, I want to skydive, and we would say, no, you're not doing that, it's too dangerous. And she would be sitting down telling us why she could do it and how it was safe to do it. She would be up to about the fourth reason why we're still trying to comprehend what the second reason was. So I understood that fear, and I had that fear myself, but I was saying, look, we could get the assist, you know, ring her grandma or ring other people that we knew, say, hey, look, she's wanting to do this. Is it appropriate?
Okay, thanks. Now we only have a couple more minutes, and look at all these questions that are written here. There's still a lot to get through. I'm going to ask one more question, which has popped up a couple of times, and then everybody, if you're interested in continuing a discussion, Susan and I will be online to continue an online discussion. And that to log on to the Practice Network is the best way to get there at healthystart.net.au. But the last question before we finish up has come from a number of people, which are asking you, Susan, what sort of support would help you to get Chloe back in your care now?
Well, I think for starters, more funding, because everything costs money. They're not going to say, right, I found this free service and it does this and this and this. That's for starters, not to mention we'll have to go back to court and try and get our guardianship rights back, and I think it would be all too messy now for Chloe, because Chloe now understands she lives with grandma because mummy and daddy have disabilities. So I think it would be too hard for us now. I was more saying on the perfect world, and I mean, us, yes, maybe I can understand, you know, sometimes I walk out of a 2-hour access going, oh God, how does a grandmother do it? You know, really tired and flat, and it's probably because I'm not doing it all the time, but I take this as being, you know, that is one concern I have for Chloe. Another I have is I've found reinforced now after we found out what was going to happen. So I've dedicated our loss to my gain, so to speak, to say, well, okay, I've lost a very important part of my life, but I haven't lost her completely. She is still a family, and she's being taught about the disabilities, which does not happen in foster care. And I must say, sadness here is sometimes not happening in kinship care. So, but what would, you know, certainly more help. Like, I only get 6 hours a week at the moment in my package, so I would need quite a lot more to be sort of help me to cook for her, you know, I'd have to, she's used to, at the moment, getting in a car and driving my car, where she knows her mum and dad travel buses, so, but I don't think she would do well with that, waiting for the bus or waiting for the train, because she's not being brought up with it. I think another thing, if you were to give children back, you need to start that as soon as you sort of close up the case, so to speak. So, yeah, you just need to sort of, yeah, we're closing up, and, yeah, so, yes, we are closing, but, this is what if you go to this service and show us that you can do A, B and C, and you keep going, you prove this. But might I say, I've heard that has been done in Gippsland, and parents are still not getting their children back. So, like, one of my parents lives in the Gippsland region, or Latrobe Valley, or whatever they call it. He was told he'll get his boy back if he does a first aid certificate and a C and a D and an E and an F. He's done all that and he still hasn't got his boy back. So I think child protection as well need to be a bit more honest with what they're offering to people with disabilities, and not just trying to, if I say this will get them off my back for now, and sort of sweeping it under the carpet. You can't do that. We'll come back up if you do that, like a weed. You'll either pull us out and get rid of us, or, help us to be parents and do the right thing for our children, which I believe most of us want to do.
Thank you so much, Susan. I think that's a hard-hitting and good note to end this webinar on. I want to thank you very much for your time. I'm sure all of the people still listening in, which is almost everyone who began with us at the beginning, which is great news, would agree and would be applauding from their computers. Thank you very much, and we'll jump online now and try to answer the rest of the questions and continue that discussion over the coming days. All right, thank you very much, Susan, and thank you, everyone.